Hi, I'm Sana, and today's video is both something totally different and something very in line with what I usually talk about on my channel. I was editing some videos I filmed a few weeks back, and with the current situation with coronavirus, it felt very weird putting up a video that was just like a normal everyday book related video. You know, I will put them up in the future, but after being in the shops today and talking to friends and being sent home from offices, one of the things that has really been on my mind, besides obviously being concerned for the community around me and my family and my friends and everyone around the world, was the topic of apocalyptic fiction. If you know me, you know that I read loads and loads of apocalyptic and dystopian fiction, that it's my favorite genre, and that to me, even in times like these, I feel myself drawn towards it. How do we deal with being scared or nervous all the time? So I decided I wanted to make a video talking about what it's like reading apocalyptic fiction in times like these, and why I still feel myself gravitating towards these books. I also just remembered that for my apocalyptic and dystopian fiction class, I didn't write an essay, but I made a video diary that kind of took the shape of like someone filming a video while they're in the middle of the apocalypse happening. And this is giving me very weird flashbacks to when I filmed that. I also wanted to give some reading recommendations for if you kind of feel like you're in the same mindset as I am and you're looking for this kind of fiction. Obviously, if you're not, I also totally understand. And I wanted to talk a bit about which books I've been interested in reading at this time. My flatmate Rosianne and I talk about these topics all the time. We both love apocalyptic films and books, and I came into the living room and said, you know what, I'm thinking of filming, and then she actually had the exact same idea. So she'll be doing something similar but different, and I'll put a link to that in the description if you want to watch more. What I'm really curious about hearing is, I guess, how reading these kinds of books makes you feel, because to me it feels like exploring something in different ways. Sometimes it's very far removed from reality, even though it could potentially be reality. The thing that I've kind of felt the most fear from reading has been climate related books. Kind of unrelated to this video, I just finished reading Losing Earth by Nathaniel Rich, and this is about the decade that we had to make a real change in climate change, so anything that's happened before now. And that was just an infuriating read, but at the same time made a lot of things so much clearer to me and was quite helpful. I will be doing a full climate related book video at some point. I guess I'll start by sharing some favorites, as weird as that sounds. Books to do with viruses and isolation. I think the first one's a very obvious one that a lot of people have been gravitating towards, but it's Station 11. This is a book that I only read a few years back for the first time. I'd had on my shelves for ages, and it's about a virus that kills 99% of the human population, but this is set in the future and about how the 1% of people are trying to rebuild society, and which bits of society kind of automatically come back, which bits they want to come back, how different people respond to it, and how they make kind of the best and worst out of these situations. This is a really beautiful book, and I think quite a hopeful book, although there are a few chapters where you're reading about the virus spreading that I can understand maybe would terrify people reading it at this moment. I'm a person who in general kind of has quite a positive outlook, and again, maybe climate change is the one thing where it doesn't work that way for me, but I usually, hope for the best. So I'm okay reading books like this, because this is probably, out of the ones I've picked, kind of the most related and realistic one. Okay, then there's a YA one, which I totally forgot about until I went through my shelves, and I thought, of course. How I Live Now by Meg Rossoff, which is a very interesting book about a American teenage girl visiting her cousins. The mom of the family, who I think is the only parent, goes to a convention in Geneva. I think it was Geneva, and then she gets stuck there, and there is a massive explosion in London. They're in the countryside, but they can like see and hear the explosion. And then after that, England goes on lockdown, and it's about them living on this farm. She has a lot of other things to deal with herself, and then they're also dealing with this like awful situation. They don't know what's going on, and obviously it's like the isolation part in this that is very relevant, that I totally forgot about until I saw this again. And it's very interesting that they are a group of children and teenagers trying to deal with this situation, and in small ways it also deals with how do people pull together, and how do they distance themselves. You don't get too much of kind of community interaction with this. It is quite kind of like an isolated story, but very interesting, especially because it's set in England. I feel like a lot of the stuff I've read is set in the US, so that's what I really liked about this one. Then going a little bit more into a slight sci-fi realm, there is of course I Am Legend. It's a classic. There's also the film with Will Smith. I did a course all about dystopian and apocalyptic fiction during my master's when I was studying English literature, and it was, you know, my favorite course, no surprise. And we read I Am Legend, and it was so interesting because the film is very modern, maybe not anymore now, and the book is definitely a classic. It's a man isolated, he thinks he's the last person alive, I guess, after this. I think in the film it's more of a virus, and in the book it's a bit more of a disease that kind of turns people into these vampire-like creatures, but definitely has that last man alive factor. This is one of my all-time favorites. Every time someone asks me for an apocalyptic fiction recommendation, this is the one I go to. Also read this during that course. I found a lot of favorites that way. Also a lot of books that I did not like. This is The Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham. I have slowly been making my way through his full works, and the more I read of it, the more I realize that so many modern day films and other authors were inspired by his works. This is a weird one to explain. So this was published in 1951. The setup of the story is that there was a meteor shower, everyone that looked at it goes blind, and then the main character was in hospital having an eye operation, and so he still has his vision when he wakes up, and he basically walks out of the hospital into this chaos. Well, partly empty streets of London, and the other part is just, you know, total chaos of people panicking, and there's situations of people like ransacking stores and killing each other over cans of what they think is, you know, pasta sauce, but is actually red paint. The sci-fi aspect is that there's these plants called triffids that have been very popular. No one really knows where they come from. They have like a stinger that can kill people, and people usually keep them on leashes in their garden, but when everyone goes blind, they can't keep them under control anymore. And so this very much moves into what happens when society falls apart and how people form new groups and new ways of living. And there's again like an isolation aspect in this, where they decide to go stay in a house somewhere by themselves and see if they can make it through what is happening. There's also a point where he's with a woman that they've kind of teamed up, and they are in an empty department store hiding out. This is just wonderfully written, super engaging, and it's something that's definitely a lot more far away from the current situation. So if you are interested in maybe trying out some apocalyptic fiction at this time, then I think this has a nice distance. So then I thought it would be interesting to quickly go into some books that I'm interested in reading that I haven't read yet in this theme. Starting with a classic, Mary Shelley's The Last Man, about a worldwide pandemic. Published in 1826. I'm pretty sure it has a lot of wandering through Italy and France and being with a very small group of people, again, sort of feeling like you're the only people left. Very intrigued by this, and because it's a historical one, a bit further removed, even though it's a very similar topic. This is a virus of a very different kind. I recently picked this up after having it on my Goodreads list for ages and ages and ages. Like, someone recommended it to me in a BookTube video years and years back, and it is The Death of Grass. This is about a virus that wipes out like grass and crops, and then how that affects the world and how people react to it. It says, when the deadly disease hits Britain, society starts to descend into barbarism. And it's about the character trekking across the country. Very interestingly, it has an intro by Robert Macfarlane, who's I think a very famous nature writer. The introduction starts with the sentence, "We live in an age of epidemics, foot and mouth, blue tongue, avian flu, SARS, infection routes, restriction zones, surveillance areas, mass inoculations. We have become fluent in the language of contagion." But this edition was published over 10 years ago in 2009. And the original story was published in 1956. Blindness, which again I've had for ages, picked up because of an interest in apocalyptic fiction and because maybe of its similarities to The Day of the Triffids. And it's about a world where people start going blind out of nowhere, and from the summary it sounds like absolute terrifying chaos. Finally, this is a quite new release. This was sent to me by Pan Macmillan, and it is Wilder Girls. Again, it seems to have a bit of a like sci-fi angle to it. I couldn't remember exactly what it was about, but then I read the first sentence of the summary, and it says, "It's been 18 months since the Raxter School for Girls was put under quarantine." So that will be my reading list. I would really love to hear from you how you feel about reading books like this. It might not be your thing to begin with, but how you feel about reading things like this at times like this, or if you're basically, you know, putting that all aside and just digging into some historical fiction or some romance. Everyone deals with things like this totally differently, and I thought it would be a really interesting topic to discuss. Alright, I don't really know how to end this video. Times are strange. I will be putting out some other videos as well and some book related videos, because I do feel that at times like this you need both serious discussion and to be able to talk about it, while at the same time also have the option to give yourself a break where possible. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all soon. Doei!